Well, the casualties are piling up in the Senate expenses scandal. First, Conservative Senator Mike Duffy quit the Conservative caucus over questionable claims. Then Senator Pamela Wallin did the same as auditors poured over her expenses. And this morning, a shocker. The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Nigel Wright, offered the Prime Minister his resignation. Stephen Harper accepted the offer. Wright was the focal point in the controversy most of the week after it came out that he'd written Duffy a personal check for $90,000 to repay his expenses, avoiding an audit. CBC's Amanda Pfeffer is in our Ottawa bureau following this developing story. Amanda, Nigel Wright resisted pressure to resign all last week. Why did he finally do it?
Well, we understand that as this story grew and grew, and Mike Duffy's problems with his housing claims have been swirling around Mike Duffy and the Senate since earlier this year. What happened with this revelation that Nigel Wright had actually written a check, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff had written a $90,000 check to end this housing claims issue for Mike Duffy. And what happened afterwards was effectively the audit into Mike Duffy. Mike Duffy removed himself from the rest of that inquiry. So this put the Mike Duffy issue into the Prime Minister's office. Nigel Wright was the connection. And so while there had been whispering among the Conservative caucus that perhaps this was the best way to go, today we see in the middle of a long weekend, the Prime Minister and Nigel Wright doing this move. We understand that a phone call took place, basically, and it became clear that while the focus had been on Mike Duffy, the focus now was moving over towards Nigel Wright, and that's what they did. In his statement, of course, he said that he intended originally solely to secure the repayment of the funds, which he considered to be in the, quote, public interest. And so, and then, of course, the statement from the Prime Minister saying that he regretted that decision and that the Prime Minister believed that Nigel Wright thought he was doing the right thing.
So Wright, as you mentioned, says that the money was paid in what he thought was the public interest. There are also thoughts that it was paid to shut down this audit that was being done on Mike Duffy's expenses. What sorts of questions will the Prime Minister face this week?
Well, what could be most interesting are questions about this connection with the Prime Minister. Of course, the Prime Minister hoping, Stephen Harper, that this will go away. He's about to take a trip to Peru next week, and he was leaving behind his caucus to answer questions. The opposition, particularly the NDP, are asking for an external investigation into what took place here. Why don't we have a listen to Alexandre Bouleris with the NDP?
It was impossible for Mr. Wright to be in the office of the Prime Minister Harper anymore. It's crystal clear. He was too involved in the scandal with Mike Duffy. But the real thing is the broken promises of the Conservatives. Yeah, you remember promises to turn the page on the scandals of the Liberal. What you know, a couple of years later, they are doing the same thing. The Conservative scandals have replaced the Liberal scandals.
And he makes the point, of course, that it was, in fact, the Prime Minister that put these people where they are, including Mike Duffy, including Pamela Wallin, including Nigel Wright. And we're going to hear a little later from Rob Walsh. He's a former parliamentary law clerk. And the big question here is, was this wrongful interference by the government in the proceedings of the Senate? Again, that $90,000 payment that went forward effectively ended an audit that was taking place in another chamber, in the Red Chamber, and it was thanks to a payment from the Prime Minister's office. Will this be considered interference?
Amanda, it's going to be quite a week. Thanks so much for this.
You're welcome.
Well, the online reaction is still coming in about Wright's resignation. On Twitter, Wright is still one of the top trending subjects in the country. Our Asha Tomlinson is tracking what people are saying on social media. Asha, take us through some of the tweets you found.
Well, Christine, I can tell you that Nigel Wright, his name, along with Canadian politics, trending on Twitter here in Canada. It's been that way for some hours, so that just gives you an idea of how many people are discussing and debating Nigel Wright's resignation and the whole controversy that has unfolded in the last few days, the last few weeks. We're hearing from politicians and we're hearing from senators. Nicole Eaton tweeted, "What a terrible loss for Canada. Nigel Wright was an outstanding public servant. Happy birthday, Nigel." His birthday was yesterday, not the greatest way to celebrate, I would think. Stephen Taylor, the director at the National Citizens Coalition, tweeted, "Nigel Wright shows a combination of honor, dignity, and class in his decision. Pity Ottawa won't appreciate what it has lost." We have heard from many people who are backing Nigel Wright and pretty much calling him the fall guy in this. And this is Norman Spector. Now, he knows the landscape well. He was, of course, the former chief of staff under the Brian Mulroney government. And he says, hard to believe Nigel Wright did this on his own. Hard to believe, too, given the stakes that he and Harper would be involved in a cover-up. And that's the kind of comments we're seeing on Twitter and beyond, Christine. A lot of people also saying that this controversy does not end with Nigel Wright's resignation, that there are more questions and answers right now.
I was just looking at our website. I see thousands of people commenting. What are some of our viewers saying?
Yeah, it's really keeps jumping by the hour. So here's a look at what some people are saying and what they're thinking about this. Stephen Harper has exerted a bad judgment in many of his nominations at the Senate, says a viewer from New Brunswick. They have also played with the truth for too long. A viewer from Prince Edward Island says, "I find it hard to believe that Harper didn't know about the Duffy payment. Wright is taking the rap for the PM. No doubt he'll be rewarded in due course, maybe with a Senate seat." And this from another viewer saying, "The resignation of an independently wealthy multimillionaire from an influential political plum job is not enough to clear this slate. Hasn't the Criminal Code of Canada been called into play here? Isn't the paying of money to an elected official and or trying to influence an ongoing investigation an offense?" And that's from a viewer out of West Bank, British Columbia. And as you say, Christina, just thousands of comments we're seeing on our cbcnews.ca website. So a lot of people are politically plugged in this long weekend.
Yeah, understandably so. Asha Tomlinson, thank you for this.
You're welcome.